Hello, hello. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, I'm so fabulous. I'm here like talking about climate with people in the media. I feel like I'm making huge changes here and shifts. So both of you have been involved with creating a charter to upgrade journalistic practices to tackle the ecological emergency. Can you tell us a little bit about the purpose of this charter? Lou, I'll start with you.
Sure. Can I start by introducing Vert first, because I'm not sure
Absolutely.
everybody in the room knows the media I work for. So Vert is an independent online media that tries to tell us all the news, to look at all the news throughout the prism of climate emergency. It's mostly an online daily newsletter with short and easily understandable articles and a lot of puns, because it's already quite distressing. We don't want to be boring as well. So we have an obsession, is trying to how to reconcile the audience with the media, because I think you noticed there is some sort of a divorce between the general public and its media, and it causes major problems, such as the fact that 40% of the French population don't know there's climate change, and we are responsible for it. And in this respect, the role of media is absolutely crucial. And we tried to write a manifesto, it was a year ago, with journalists, scientists, and people from the civil society. And then we thought it would be more interesting to try to create a text for the journalists, written by journalists, to try to upgrade our practices throughout all the media. And we, with our colleague Anne-Sophie Novel, gathered a small group of journalists with Sandrine and 30 other journalists from all walks of life and from all kinds of media, like small and big. And we worked for a few months to design this first charter. The name is super long in English, I'm sorry, for upgrading journalist practices to tackle the ecological crisis. It is super long, I'm very sorry about that. Can we display it on screen, or?
Not if we don't have an images yet, but we
can.
Right. You can find it online. That's for sure.
chartjournalismeecologie.com, and then maybe you can look it up while we speak.
Sandrine, can you tell us a little bit about what your involvement was in building this charter, so that we have a little bit more context? Because whilst you work at France Télévisions, you didn't engage with this as an employee of France Télévisions.
No, not at all. Of course, they knew. And hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. The idea was to gather different media and different journalists from different media to work all together, to write this charter. What we saw, what we witnessed, when we were working inside our different media, especially general media like mine, is that most of the time, journalists, when they were not specialized, where they were not, really into, this topic, they often felt lonely, because they didn't really know how to do, what to do, when they had to treat, an example of climate change, when they have to do a report about that. So we thought it was really important to have some guidelines to help them, not to be lost when they have to do a report about heat waves, for example, or any other subject. So this is why we decided to be all together to help them to have some, these guidelines.
So the guidance has 13 key actions outlined in it. We are not going to have time to go through all 13. I think that might be a little bit much. But maybe can you, I'll start with you, Sandrine, can you highlight maybe one or two of the, just to give us a little flavor of the sorts of things that are covered?
Yeah, sure. For example, one of the first article of the Charter is to understand that climate change should not be treated in just one column, because before, and it's been changing, so this is really a very good point. 2 years ago, in big media, when you wanted to have some news about the environment, most of the time it was at the end of the newspaper or at the end of the television news, For example, you had very interesting reports about the disappearance of some insects, or very beautiful images of elephants, but it wasn't through all, the items. And what was really important with the Charter is to make people understand that climate change has consequences on the retirement system, the health system, the way, for example, students, when it's too hot, outside, when it's too warm, it's not possible for students to go and take their exams. So it happens in France 3 years ago, for example, exam had to be postponed. So we know that it's going to be like that more and more in the years to come. So it was really important for us to make people understand that, yes, it has to be treated in every single story in our newspapers or in news stories in television.
So one pillar is really looking beyond it being a single column, but kind of saying it's important to intersperse into all content. Lou, can you give us an example of another one or two of them?
Yeah, well, in order to do that, what you have to do is to train all journalists from all columns to understand at least the basics of climate change and biodiversity loss. And so this is something that we do in some big media outlets with Imagine 2050 and other hi, Laurent. And it is very crucial because we need to have economic journalists or political journalists that are able to ask the proper questions to heads of companies or to political leaders, and they have to get proper answers to their questions. And if they don't understand what's at stake looking at the ecological emergency, well, the general public is not going to understand anything. So this is very crucial. And also one of the key points to me is that we need to be able to decipher and expose greenwashing. The thing is, now a part of the industry, the companies are just creating an alternative reality where everything is fine and you can just keep on living the life just the way you did until now with some new green products. And this is just not true, and this is really like miles away from what's in the IPCC reports that really tells in like many different fashions that we need to change everything right now in a very radical manner. So when you read that in the news and you get the sense that it's going to be okay and you're going to keep on living like you always done so far, this is a major problem for us all. I mean, what's at stake is like how can we inhabit this planet in a few decades from now?
Can I give more
Of
example?
course.
Yeah. It's written in the charter that we have to be very careful about the images we choose. And if I can give an example, some years ago when we needed to cover, for example, heat waves, at the same time, in the very same news, we were able to show how awful this heat wave was, how it was awful for elderly people, how it was horrible for people who worked outside. But a few minutes later, or the day after, we were able to show images where people were so happy to take a drink, for example, outside, because, it was in some way very pleasant, to be outside and to be able to be outside in the gardens, to be outside and have showers in some cities. And so at the same time, we were able to show that there were some consequences, but some people were quite happy with what happened. And now, thanks to trainings, and I think we'll discuss about it a little bit later, thanks to trainings, we don't do it anymore. We don't show people who are so happy because they are climate change. Even if we go on beaches when, for example, this winter we have a big heat wave too, at least we always ask questions about their concerns, whether it's normal or not, and each time people answer that even if they are outside having a drink, they know that this is not a usual situation, that they are worried, and even if they feel good at this moment, this is something that worries them.
Yeah, so essentially we can't be having mixed messages. On the one hand, climate crisis. On the other hand, sunning on the beach. Which is it? Are we sunning on the beach and we're happy, or are we in a crisis? We need to find a better way of pulling those together. And Lou, you did mention about training. It was something that was brought up as well in the panel before this, that how can we expect journalists to ask the hard questions of politicians and business owners if they simply don't understand the climate crisis? How are they going to dig deeper? So that begs the question, what does great climate training look like? Are there specific criteria or things that should be covered that we can say this is great training for journalists around climate?
I mean, great training involves the 13 key points of the charter. No, I mean, it's really a tool for journalists to identify everything that we as journalists don't do properly and everything that we could do better. Some other key points to me are the fact that we need to take an educational approach. When we say this thing emitted 1 ton of CO2, like, who in this room understands what's 1 ton of CO2? I mean, you guys are experts, I'm not talking about you specifically, but like, nobody understands that. And if you don't get an element of comparison or orders of magnitude, I mean, you can talk about CO2 as much as you want, nobody's going to understand anything. So we need to reconsider news as it's another school, you know, it's a second school that you go to throughout your whole life. And we at Vert, we really want to give tools to our readers to make them able to understand very complicated news about climate change, biodiversity, and so on.
So it's understanding, having a better understanding, not just of the broad issues around climate, but also communicating that to various different audiences. We heard in the previous panel, some people are, as the people in this room are, they've been in and around climate impact for a long time and they want depth of detail. But it's easy to forget there's a lot of people who simply are trying to understand the basics.
Even some journalists are still trying to understand the basics. So training, I think this is the most powerful tool we have to make people, journalists, and the audience understand how important this climate crisis is. And if I can give you the example of France Télévisions, you know what happened with the trainings, you know, we've been doing for 2 years now. Something like 2 years ago, we, with a small group of environmental journalists, we had one meeting with one author of the IPCC. IPCC in French is GIEC, IPCC. And it was just before the release of their new report, and we wanted to have some background information. And at the end, she said, so this scientist said, this is absolutely horrible the way you treat climate crisis on television. If you want, I come and I do some training. And 2 weeks later, we actually bumped into another IPCC scientist, and she said exactly the same thing. She said, I can come and train you. So we decided, with this small group of journalists, that we were not the ones that needed to be trained, even if we always learn something, So we went to see the direction, of France Télévisions, and we said, we have the most important scientists in France that are telling us that they are willing to come and train all the people. And they said, yeah, of course, this is wonderful. So we did one seminar a year and a half ago, and a second one, and a third one, and a fourth one last week. So now over 120 journalists have come to these seminars and listened to the most important scientists in France. People from the economic department, people from the politics department, and people from the cultural department. So, and there was something, I think you could say a shift happened, not just with this, we have this climate and weather new emission that you saw, you just talked about. But it was one part of the shift that was needed.
People need information in order to do things different and better. Why do you think this charter is so important right now, Lou?
So we released it last September, and since then there's around 2,000 journalists and more than 200 media outlets, journalism schools, like media companies that signed it. So it's actually pretty big, and also there's like some small and some major media outlets. So it has had a very important impact. We released it just after this scorching summer of 2022. So actually it was like everywhere in the news, and I think it was some sort of a turn at that point, and like many major media starting to train the journalists because they realized that they weren't good enough. Simply, they didn't understand most of what was at stake. So I think it's had an impact. I think now it's used in journalism schools. So like all junior journalists now they have a training regarding to the working.
Yes, we're back.
It is. Okay, so as I was saying, this is very important, and I wish all the major media had signed it. But now you see all the media have created their own charter, which is maybe not as good as this charter, but it's good, and like all the small changes in a major media is going to have a lot of impact, I believe. So I think these are good times in the media world in France.
It's a good starting point that helps people, gives people a sense of direction as well in terms of the starting point. That being said, we've talked a lot about it now, so there'll be people who are excited saying this sounds really good, it sounds really interesting, I want to understand more. We've only managed to talk about a handful of the principles. How do people access it? How do they get involved? What's the next step for people who want to take part in the Charter, Lou?
We didn't want to create a charter police and to look at what the signatories would do in their own media, but some people, Citizens Collective, they use it to rub it in the face of some media who signed it and did not respect the principle. There's actually been one of the media who signed a contract with Total Energy to work for them to do their communication, and like people go crazy about that even inside the media, because like how did we sign the charter and then we work for one of the biggest polluters on earth. So this is really good. Like you can go online at chartjournalismeecologie.com, you can read it, you can send it to your favorite media or journalist, you can try to make them sign, and you can rub it in their face if they don't respect it when they signed it.
It's not media police, but it might be close enough. Sandrine and Lou, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Please give them a warm round of applause.
Thank you very much.
That does bring us towards the end of this session. If our very first speaker earlier on today, Simon Mundy, he is signing his books actually behind the blue bubble in the bookshop. So if you're interested in getting a copy of the book and diving a little bit deeper into what he spoke about in his talk, you're welcome to do that. My name's been Lovelda Vincenzi. This has been an absolute blast. Enjoy the rest of your day at Change Now, and hopefully I'll see you again in the not too distant future. Take care.